Oh, so many people. I saw Bob coming in. I got an email, but David and Mark, you just snuck in the side door, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, I just followed the link in the email, but
Well, yeah.
was that me being too modern and connected? I did look for the handwritten envelope nestled on the mantelpiece, but I couldn't find it anywhere.
How are you feeling anyway, Mark? You've been a bit
Actually, like
quiet
rubbish,
around
truth
here,
be
haven't
told.
you?
So I'm trying not to cough the way through the whole thing, but anyway, no, it'll all go away. Be swept away by the next tide, but a bit rubbish at the moment.
Yeah, well, hope it, yes. And David, I haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing?
Well, I just wanted to check in briefly. I may not be able to stay the whole meeting, but I think you'd be surprised at how many hours I have spent on the future of text, the original. And the way I'm treating it, it's very interesting, I think. It's like a crowdsourcing through celebrity luminary thinkers on a topic, and then using the highlighter method and hypertext thinking, expanding to really explore the future of text from a more formal forecasting perspective, where you look for what are all the dependencies, what are all the possible futures, what are all the different technologies that interact. Because I think what I discovered is, I think I wrote this to you previously, the title of an essay, or actually I have enough stuff for like a thick book at this point, would be The Future of Text and Everything Else. Because it's very clear that you go back, to Neolithic times, that there's a coincidence between the emergence of text and the emergence of sort of the modern mega machine and the whole stratification of society that occurs at that time. It's very much tied to the emergence of text. And now we can imagine many possible futures. So the whole exercise has turned into something quite interesting. But you haven't heard from me because I've been so immersed in it. Now at a point, I don't want to hijack the meeting here, so I'll make this brief, where I am going through my High Trail, which has about 550 excerpts from the essays, but almost over 200 pages of excerpts from related articles, my own comments, and so forth. So, and I'm going through and creating a taxonomy. I'm identifying all of the key terms and phrases and putting them in categories. And the next step is to work with several different AI NLP applications to see if you can then take my model that is represented in the High Trail. Why did I organize things the way I did, and the coherence between each snippet and so forth? Have the machine create a model of that and then point it at a repository of over 4,000 documents that I've collected, and not point at documents, but actually say, this snippet looks like it would fit here in your emerging narrative. So that's what I've been up to. It's been pretty intense, actually, and quite rewarding. And I'm learning so much. And what's going to be interesting is circling back to you and people associated with the Future of Text project to see if the narrative I've created is of value as sort of a starting point for inquiry by other people. And that sort of moving into a collaborative stage. So that's what I've been up to. And it's just taken, longer, partly because my curiosity, it is very dopamine fulfilling, right? Because just a quick example, I'm looking at stuff on XR, augmented intelligence, virtual intelligence, and so forth. And I stumble on ambient intelligence, something I wasn't aware of, which is this idea that the environment will be embedded with intelligence, that when you walk into that environment, it'll kind of give you what you want or be responsive. It's a little different than, it's another one of the XRs that I wasn't aware of, right? And then you get into that and it takes you to something else and so forth. So there's sort of this divergence. And then when I sit down and think about what does this all mean, then it starts to come together inside my own head because I've prepared my mind in a way for insight. Anyway, okay, so that's my spiel.
That's great, David. Will you be able to do a presentation in one of our weekly meetings soon?
Yeah, I'm a week. I hate to give a estimate because I thought I was going to be done, and then it's sort of like the curiosity bug just keeps you. Obviously, I have to put some parameters, but I would say another week. I should be ready with all the pieces.
Yeah, just ping us because there's a couple of demos coming up. So to make sure that you enter at a time when you feel ready. Just want to say hi to everyone else. Vint, I know you're extremely busy today, so glad you're here. Mark, did you have something?
Yeah, just a very quick thing. I'm just listening to David, and I'm assuming that what's coming out of this is, in a sense, in a very loose sense, a sort of typing tagging. I mean, I sort of want to avoid keywording, but the point is, one of the things we've been playing around in the quite lightweight visualizations we've been doing with the ACM dataset, which you may have seen, which we're sort of sitting alongside the Visual Meta project. And I just recall you were doing this work, and I'm thinking one side product of that is we may be able to extract, in a sense, some thematic some terms applied to articles for future of text that we could use to just do some more exploratory visualization type work. You know, what are the strands? You know, what are the things about typography as opposed to programming? You know, or what are the things to do with handwriting? All these things that I think are really interesting to be able to pull out of this, because there are some really interesting sort of linked strandings through this very wide field we have. And that, if nothing else, may be a nice way for some people to get into the growing corpus of what it will become, because you can start at a place of interest to yourself, and you will inherently be wound into all sorts of other things as you go, but you have a non-scary place to start. You know, you can look at familiar stuff. I'll shut up at that.
Well, I got up. This is Bob Horn. I just want to say to David and to Mark, I'd be interested in contacting with you because I'm very interested in visualization. I'd certainly like to get a presentation, you know, the presentation that David does on whenever that happens. I don't think I've been getting announcements of those kind of things, but maybe I have. Anyway, the article that I've written for volume 2 is called Diagramming, Metadiagramming, and Megadiagramming.
Mm-hmm.
Now that has to do a lot with visualization for the two of you, and I'd sure love to have a conversation with you. I won't say anything more about it because it's a big subject and there are a lot of people on that.
So you're Bob Horn, information blocks is?
Yes, I'm Bob Horn, information mapping and visual language. And
so that's very
mapping.
Absolutely fundamental to what we're doing. And then the idea is to create knowledge graphs or different types of mapping of what is there. But the cool thing with Highlighter is when you click on a node, it shows you the excerpts, the blocks in context, right? So you can then instantly go from a snippet into the document. And so it's very nice to see also vint cerf here, because I had a lot of comments and excerpts on both Bob's and Vince's essays. And also, I just want to mention, Rafael, I have you on my list because I want to play around with the idea of taking these blocks of text and comments and using your card metaphor for rearranging them. Because what you end up with is the blocks from your information blocks arranged in a narrative structure reflecting the understanding of the individual or team that's assembling the pieces. So you end up with something that has global and local coherence and is basically a preferred pathway through a large number of online documents.
I think it would be very nice, Bob and David, if you're able to join us in some of the weekly meetings, Mondays or Fridays, to dive more into this. I think that would be very useful. I just wanted to mention, yeah, Vint, please.
Well, no, go ahead. You were going to jump into. I have something to follow specifically what.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
And Mark were talking about, though, if I could.
Please.
Okay, so taxonomies are really awkward things because you end up with big arguments over how to taxonomize any particular thing. And if you get into the kind of arguments about cladistics that show up in, you know, the people who are trying to classify animals of the past. What I would like to understand is how to compare the attempt at taxonomizing content with what we are seeing from the GPT-2 and GPT-3 constructs. Because what's happening there is that it's just a full text thing. And we are essentially generating an extremely complex probability space that associates groups of words with each other. And so when you type in a sentence, for example, it causes the GPT-3, for instance, or something that we're doing at Google, which is similar, to compose the next parts based on all the stuff it's ingested and the likely probability that the following words would be compatible with the preceding ones. So there's this complex probability space that's encoded in the machine learning multi-layer neural network. The content of those things is derived from literally billions of documents, or at least if I may be wrong to say billions of documents.
No, you're right.
Billions of words anyway, just an enormous amount of material, which is essentially relating every damn word to every other damn word in the corpus. And so I'm trying to figure out whether there might be a way of saving you the trouble of the taxonomy by tricking the system into using the same mechanism that is being used by the GPT-3 constructs to create this complex probability space, high dimensional probability space.
Yeah, and so if I just quick response, part of what I'm doing is in response to the applications that I'm going to be working with. If you have an NLP entity extraction, they want entities to look for, right, and so forth. Part of it also is this idea of seeding the machine. So I have I'm making a taxonomy, but it's for a unique collection, and even the topic is unique. It's a topic that I've defined. If you looked at the stuff I've included on the future of text, you may say, well, why is that in there? Well, it's in there because of the idiosyncrasies of what's up in here, right? So I'm starting off with, these are terms that look interesting to me that maybe would add to my narrative and I want to expand on. And then the idea is the machine can then engage in a kind of unknown unknowns finding where I may have certain entities that I'm interested in. The machine can say, here are entities that are strongly related to terms that you're interested in, but you don't have those terms in your collection, right? Do you think they might be relevant, right? So then so the machine is kind of doing this first pass of curating large amounts of information, passing them back to me in a form where I can rapidly review those instances in the context of the sources and decide, oh yeah, that does fit. That does add to the story I'm telling. So I don't know if that, so anyway, that's my thought.
I'll just respond to that, Vint. What you said, be very interested in seeing what GPT-3, 2 and 3, which I haven't dealt with except by reading articles,
Right.
how it would respond to some sort of taxonomical request. I don't know quite what you call the input there. I'll call it a request. and see what kind of output it would produce.
What happens with these systems is that at the moment they're being used to construct dialogue.
Yes, I
So-
understand that. Yeah.
And so what the dialogue is the mechanism through which discovery takes place. So if you said, I'm interested in penguins, the system will respond with something typically about penguins if it's ever encountered anything about penguins.
Uh-huh.
And as you interact with the system, it's drawing on its fund of content in order to construct a response. So it's a very interesting experience. Of course, if it has bad data, it will give you bad data. And so you should never believe anything that you see, especially given that it may have accumulated all of its probabilistic mechanisms from sources that are completely wrong and bogus and everything else. So there are big warnings in our system saying, do not believe anything that you get back out of the system, because we have no guarantees that any of the data is.
Well, and that's what happened with IBM and the Watson thing, right? We were brought back all this stuff about research on cancer, but the database, the articles, 99% of them had bad information in them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But the interesting thing about the interactions with these kinds of constructs is that you don't do a deliberate search kind of thing where you're looking for this and that and this and so on, or that and that, the usual combinatorial searches. You're actually simply having an interaction with it, and information comes out of that interaction. It's a very different kind of information search mechanism. So I don't mean to over push this, but I'm curious about the relationship between that kind of mode of interaction with a body of information and the more classical thing where we're much more focused on a particular thing that we want to get.
So that now I get where you're coming from. So the process that I got into, and it's very much, Sysmahalia flow stuff. You just get lost in this thing, is a kind of mental deflection, right? I read something in an article, even in just the abstract, and I say, oh, that reminds me, let me go search Google. Let me go, and up comes related stuff, and it may introduce a whole new concept that's sort of like a far transfer thing. It's distantly related, but enough that, oh, that is relevant. With the GP 3, 4, whatever level you're at, it's possible that the machine could say, oh, people that were of the billions of words on the topic you're interested, here's some things that came up that aren't obvious and that you're not aware of. Relationships that, because that's what we're looking for, right? The whole process I'm engaged in is activating my associative learning and memory system to, starting with the input from the essays, or it could be anything, and then going off to say, okay, what else is out there that might, through create a combinatorial creativity processes, I can come up with innovations, new ideas that aren't in the data that I'm looking at. And so I could see where, so you really maybe have a system that has both types of, traditional search entity extraction, plus this sort of machine speaking or writing that might suggest, oh, here's some things that aren't obvious that have emerged from this, soup.
That happened to me with the exercise that Frode gave us for creating concepts, I guess you're calling them, and definitions or glossary for volume 2. I had to go back through what I wrote and decide what it was that I would put in there. And I found that I used the words thought improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, should I make that a glossary entry? And what am I talking about here? And for me, hierarchically, it was what is the larger project within which the future of text might appear.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and that seems to be what we're in a certain sense, what we're talking about here with David and Mark and you, Ben. Yeah.
Thanks for bringing. Sorry, Mark. Just one quick thing. Thanks for bringing that up, Bob, because there are so many different dimensions we need to look at when we're looking at the future of text, and one of it is what can AI do, and I think it's really worthwhile what you guys discussed. But at the same time, the human side of what did I mean by that? Of using thinking, writing to think. For the book, through Ismail, I've done 2 interviews this week with former presidents. And it's been absolutely joyous. It's like having coffee with a nice friend to get their perspective. One was previously an academic. This will be released, who it is, and so on later. And the way they talk about, as politicians, it's about speaking, about the media being heard. They know that in their political career, what's on TV is the only thing that matters, or video. But even that, they highlight, they need the notes, not just for remembering, but to pre-write out what they're going to say. And they highlight the importance of writing if you want something to be around for the long time. Who watches old movies? We all read old books, but we don't watch old movies. Not to the same extent, Bob. Of course, there are some classics that won't go away. But it was just really beautiful. I also met with Sam Winston yesterday. We had lunch. And he is a British artist, weird guy, and I say that with the absolute best intention. He does a lot of things that end up looking like that. That's all text. But I thought this was something really lovely I wanted to share with you guys. So there's a story running down the side of that paper. So what he's done, when you unfold it, on the other side here is the definition of each one of those words. Of course, what you're talking about is many dimensions higher. One definition clearly isn't enough and other connections, but he's using the physicality of the paper to make it that kind of dimensional, which I just thought was really lovely. So I'm hoping for volume 2 and 3 and beyond, we can keep getting perspectives that are surprising like that.
If I could touch on Vint's point about GPT, and just a brief observation question, because I don't know of a word yet. I think it's up to, maybe there's already a word, but there is such a paradigmatic difference between how GPT thinks and by extension all data science, all algorithms and anything that we call ML or deep or AI, in that it's pretty much the opposite of how we think. It's it doesn't care about the whys or the whos. It's just collecting data. For me, the eureka moment was when I realized that one of these algorithms was going through our retail data, and it was making categories that didn't have names, that we could not even analogize to give a title to. It made a pattern and it understood something that was functional and useful for it to hold on to, even if just for a moment, until it got disproven or not disproven so much, that's again human think, but was reduced in effect based on more relevant patterns that it had discovered, right? So that, I think David Weinberger comes close to the idea about how science today is more and more about just processing data and then coming up with the hypothesis after looking at the data. It's similar to that, but I wish there was a word for that kind of like bottom up. Yeah.
It's called induction.
That's true. Yeah.
That's how you induce a theory, by looking at the evidence and then ask what could possibly generate such outcomes, and so that's basically an inductive process.
You're right. I feel like that term is a little too overloaded and overlaps with the human. Well, it started out as a human practice of induction. I'm curious if there's a computer term for just taking in data and it's not coming up with reasons. It is induction. You're right.
Well, it feels like it is, because it's pattern discovery.
Yeah.
And it isn't telling you what exactly it's using for its pattern. identification, that is, its entities, as David might say. And this this connects with a question I've had for a while. For the last 3.5 years before COVID, I worked on an IARPA project on cognitive science, on crowdsourcing for intelligence analysis, and for the military, and we're one of the things that we came across is a very interesting possibility of studying how teams of people weigh, that is WEIGH, weigh different values in their arguments, because they were trying to persuade each other, and we had a system that was able to track their discussions in their attempts to come to conclusions, or to write intelligence reports. In fact, is what we were attempting to do. So the whole question of how we weigh things in processes like taxonomizing or arguing or induction of different kinds is one that came up, and unfortunately, as our project ended, we have not been able to pursue it since then. But it's something that the GPT is doing. It's weighing in some sort of way, as I understand it. It has the neural network part of it doing that. But the concepts of weighing in humans has not advanced very far, well, frankly, since Leibniz. But,
wouldn't that be like, I've been reading lately again, the surfaces and essences, I believe,
Mhm.
that that our main cognition faculty is through analogy.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a twist on weighing, in the sense that you're saying this is like that, I'm going to weigh it with this, I'm going to make this kind of, again, like category that has no name but roughly means mommy, and can be extended or given nested definitions. Yeah.
So you've done two things that are rather interesting. The analogy thing is like a prefabricated structure that is similar to something that you're looking at, and you want to use the prefabricated structure to try to reason about it. There is something interesting about the efforts to do what's called explainable AI, because when you look at machine learning, it's mostly probability density functions that you are messing around with. That's really what's going on. It's this gigantic high dimensional probability density function that produces output. And when you say, well, why did it do that? The answer is there's all these PDFs, and I don't mean printed material, I mean probability density functions. And they produce this output. And that's very unsatisfying. So now there's effort to try to find a way to articulate what was going on. And one of the ways to do that might very well be this reasoning by analogy, this abstraction notion that's representative of the specific materials that produce the probability density functions. So we might want to go look at people who are trying to do explainable AI and find out where they are in their thinking.
That's excellent. Yeah, it kind of also goes back to when I just hopped on, you were talking about taxonomies, and if there is a future of text that I'd like to see, I don't. There's a lot that's already locked in, like the languages that we use and the associations that we have. But our natural language has a much greater faculty for these analogies, these liminal category spaces, and everything that is digitized typically has much more formal or hard taxonomies and categories. We haven't yet gotten to that space where we can tag something as sorta right?
Yeah.
We kind of can. I mean, there are degrees of, like Bob was talking about intelligence earlier. I know that in the intelligence community, any report has to be tagged with degrees of reliability. You know, so there are not necessarily digital ways. Mark, by the way, I do see your hand up.
Oh,
But
sorry.
just on the current topic, I was doing a bit of Googling in the background while you were talking there, guys, but I couldn't find the term. But I think, Alan, what you're partly talking about is in the human brain, forget the ML, but the actual neural network of our brains, the way it's constant adversarial networks, which constantly comes up with new ways of this as a thing. And a really interesting aspect of that is, of course, words and concepts tend to be stored closest to the things in the brain that represent that. So where we have a representation for the hand, that's where concepts for hand will be stored. And this crazy guy, Sam Winston, he spent 1 month in complete darkness a couple of years ago as an artistic experiment. When he came out and he had to relearn how to see from an adult perspective, it was like he was reteaching those networks. One of his kind of weird moments was seeing something in the sky, and someone said, "What is that? Can you describe it?" And he said, "Well, there's something flapping about." Intellectually, he knew it was a bird, but he couldn't see the bird in the sense that in computer speak, we use the term affordances. He hadn't learned to map the affordances on yet. So I think, Alan, what you're talking about is two very interesting divergent points. One is, how can we, in these environments, map onto the human stuff? You know, what is naturally in our brain where things are mapped, and how can we go outside of that? So we really look at the chunks, to use another word for what you're talking about, that have no reality outside of the computer, that seem completely random, but they do actually make sense for that. That may help us drive deeper insights than our natural brains could. Yeah, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, sorry. Sort of the looping nature of these conversations means that some of this means something overtaken by event. Just something that sort of stuck in my brain as Bob was talking earlier about this you know, the way we pull out and we create these ideas. You know, and it's incremental formalization that's going on. Somebody's talking about the concept space, and then you know, we've already gone back to the fact that actually, rather like we find the computers doing, we do sort of create these temporary, unnamed things. These loose concepts floating around, you know, in whatever happens inside our brains, you know, we don't know exactly. But I always think to the map analogy, you know, open-ended space where we move bits around. The jigsaw's the easiest bit, you know, we put the blue bits over there and then the blue-green bits there. Oh, and then we put the blue-green bits together and then the ones different, you know, whichever way you do it. But the point is, these are all temporary categorizations, not necessarily for the long term, but we're using them actively to help us make sense of stuff. And what that, to me, argues strongly for is something that I do find myself worrying about is leaving space for the human in the loop. Because something that I think we unintentionally do a lot of the time is, you know, because thought takes effort and we'd rather be down the pub or something instead. We think, right, I know what we'll do. We'll take this complex idea and we'll stick it in a box, you know, and make it a problem that's, you know, solved, and we let a computer run over it. And I'm not sure that's helping ourselves as much as it may, because there are some things we still do quite well, and until we fully understand how we do them, you know, I think we want to make space for them in our systems and our, you know, so our use of how we do stuff and handle text. You know, it's just a plea for a human in the loop, and not just as a dead man's handle.
So let me just jump in and say, the concept of wicked problems, by definition, the solution, there is no right answer. The solution reflects the values and priorities of the decision makers. So you're not going to leave that to machines. The other thing is that, and this is out of the future of text essays, you have the oral tradition of storytelling, and narrative naturalists, which is a school within narrative theory, believe that telling stories isn't just our effort to make sense out of the chaos of our minds, but actually is how our minds work, that we create narratives, and that's how we organize reality in our minds. That's our picture. And so so here's the interesting thing. I'd be interested, this sort of ties in. in narrative theory, you have events and a timeline, right? So things happened, and the discourse is how you talk about or tell the story as the events unfold. But how does that apply when you're looking at research articles and concepts and so forth? And what I'm arguing is that the assembler of the kind of narrative that you make in Highlighter is defining the events. The fragments, Bob's information blocks, become the events, and the assembler, the human, is arranging them in a way that has coherence and tells a story, so that not only is the human preparing his or her own mind for moments of insight, but has something that we can share with other people that understand narrative. And then eventually the idea is you use that structure to train the machine to go find stuff like the kinds of things that I found with the kinds of coherence that I've created as the assembler. And that's kind of where I'm trying to go with.
As you said earlier on today, David, and I think this is a key insight that I found from writing some of the beginning of Future Text Volume 1, it really depends on who we're trying to augment and for what. So I think we talked very well about understanding a general kind of a knowledge space. And I think that in this wider community, we need to kind of remember what that is, because in some cases, we're helping people do different things. Also, in terms of update, Rafael and Laura may join us here today. She has other commitments. They have started tweeting and Instagramming and also looking at TikTok to highlight some of the articles from Volume 1, leading up to create a bit more of a buzz for Volume 2, which is really nice. So that's worth highlighting. And briefly, I'm going to do some screen sharing here because we talked about timelines. Has everybody seen the work that Adam and Mark has done? So there's two halves of this. This was based on a design that I did in 2016. And Adam looked at it, and because he's a bit of a genius, he implemented it based on data that Mark Anderson has taken from the hypertext conference from day one, turned into data structure that's compatible with visual meta, meaning any new documents that are visual meta will just slot into this. So click on these are all papers from that conference. And you get a little bit of, on the left, what they cite, on the right.
Can you share that document with us, or?
I put the in the top of the comments, the chat thread. I've put the information for both the underlying data set which I've made, which is now on a DOI, and the actual visualization page. I'll put it in again.
So the cool things here are, number one, the fact that the data can be added to with visual meta, which of course I'm very thrilled about. It's also, this is quite cool, but the magic that Adam added to this is if I now hit the tab on my keyboard, it changes it into a completely different visualization with the same document selected. So you see this is applying programmable browsing, tabbing through them, right? So in this view, as you can obviously tell, by year, you can see who cites and what's cited. So this is early days. This is the kind of stuff that we are really trying to find other ways. It's extremely linear. It's extremely primitive in some ways. But what's exciting is, number one, it's possible because of the data being available. And number two, the fact that it can tab through different views allows us to do more experiments with stuff that may be great and we may throw away. There's a link here to download the document if you don't already have it on your computer for every document. So I just wanted you all to be aware of this work.
I mean, fairness, I think the linearity is just in part because it's a in-conference citation list, which is a project I'd had sort of on the back burner moons ago. I happened to sort of fill that out. So it has an inherent linearity in it, but it doesn't have to be so.
Yeah, no, exactly. The linearity comes from time, and it's only one view. Here is what I'm working with Dave King at Exaptive. This is very crude, and this is the beginning. It's some of the authors from Volume 1. These icons look like they are for documents, but of course they're from articles. But the kind of thing that I think is very exciting is to have, this page, I don't know if I've logged in or out, but it's another view, and it's a graph view. But the way they handle tags or keywords or categories is they allow for a definition, which means they're completely compatible with the visual meta notion of glossary terms, which is something I'm really pushing because it's so easy to just put labels everywhere. But if you actually define the label, suddenly you've given it meaning through effort. And then because of the definitions, you obviously can include other tags there. So you get a natural way of just writing, and that's how you connect different concepts, making it a very human way. And some of us doing Monday and Friday talks have used this kind of approach to go away from the linearity of some of the timeline structure, so you can look at it by concepts and so on. That's why there was the call out to all of you to, if you want to send in some concepts for your papers for book 2. Tossing a coin, Alan, your first name starts with an A, so you're first.
Always. I love it. Thank you. I'll just share this quickly. It has issues in that it's a very scoped and predefined domain, but it's really fun how many people have created interfaces for Wittgenstein's Tractatus. So this is one of them as a subway map. And what I like about it is, first off, you, rather than being given an article that you are primed, this is a thing I'm going to have to read through or skim to understand. It says, here's the bones, here's the skeleton, right? And this is how these concepts relate. So I was thinking about this in terms of other domains like ACM, how it might work. And what I would love to see and sort of been tinkering with in Svelte is rather than just picking on dots, it would be interesting if, so in the timeline view for what Adam put together, you have like an XY axis, and I believe the X is time, right? And the Y stack is somewhat arbitrary. Here, you might be able to define maybe what your tags or what your interests are, your XY axis, right? And it would be, think almost going back into the term of GPT-3, but thinking of it as a search engine. That's an open-ended, I don't know what I'm looking for kind of search engine, right? And so you could define a couple of parameters, and then instead of this being a subway track of chapters, you would get a redefined spine that might go through 217 to 41271, et cetera. And that's your through line. And it's saying, here are the main points through these articles that most deal with what you've just asked for. But then now you can easily see the spines of those major texts and how they relate to other concepts. Does that make sense? I should draw it out, but it's an interface I've been tinkering with.
That makes sense. Rafael, I saw your hand just came up. Is that because it's about this? Please.
I think connecting with what Alan is showing, I like this graph because one of the concepts that I tend to think about when organizing information, when browsing for information rather than searching, is to start with the person searching for the information as the protagonist and using context as the base for search. So if I usually use the example of a bicycle, let's say I want to buy a new bicycle. You start asking questions about the bicycle that you want. So the first question might be, is there a particular brand that you're interested in? And then as soon as you select that brand, you put all of those, all of that data, all of that information into a funnel. So it only goes through what has been selected. So let's say you select the brand, so everything that is not that brand gets removed from the funnel. And then the next query would be probably price. Let's say you choose like $500 as, you know, the most you want to pay for that bicycle. So all of the bicycles that are over 500 get removed. And then as you keep asking yourself those questions, you start with, let's say, from 1,000 choices, 1,000 possible choices, and after you apply like 3 or 4 or 5 filters, you end up with a dozen choices. And that makes finding information a lot more contextual than trying to browse every possible outcome. And it kind of looks like this metro map of information, because every choice gets you a little bit deeper, and then it kind of branches off. So
Yeah.
I quite like this.
The only thing I would add there with the 500 example, the bike example, I love is and I've seen this so many times, even with my own clients and whatnot. Say 500, if you could put a confidence score on that, and then see a kind of a weakened radius of other bikes that might actually fit all of your other criteria, but it happens to be 700. And you know what? Maybe I picked 500 wrong. Sure, I could do 700. You know, that kind of peripheral view would be great.
Yeah.
That's
like the 501, 502. They should end up showing up, right?
In military radars, they have an interesting thing where you set the zoom scope, so to speak. But if something has been seen and it's out of the scope because you've zoomed in, it's stuck at the top of the screen, which is really powerful.
Wow.
So you could do that. So the ones that are actually more expensive they exist, but you just put them as a swoosh. There are so many interesting visualizations that could be done with this. So yeah, that's a good example. But of course, Rafael, for our knowledge to fit into this, they need something like visual meta. And I'm so glad so many of you meet twice a week to go through how we can make that more useful. So billions of thanks. Mark.
Yeah, and I don't want to derail what's really interesting. It was just passing thought that sort of came in again as I was thinking you were talking about, you know, how things sort of fit together in when we look at the visualizations and the sort of metadata around them. And I find myself thinking at the moment deeply on how do we write, and I use deliberately the word write, for remediation. And by that, I mean that I write something that is possibly never going to be used necessarily in the order that I write it. But you know, it needs to have some coherence. But a tool that allows me to write such that the pieces within it are still useful when reorganized in a different way. And I suppose what's packed into that is sort of previous experience working as an information emergency plumber, and just sort of, you know, and time spent cleaning data. And even, the other thing that springs to mind is a fascinating difference in my perspective of Wikipedia before and after my doctoral research, because basically it is, you know, the amount of collaboration is massively less than you imagine. There's an awful lot of ownership, although it's just not seen until you touch somebody else's stuff. So the one thing that Wikipedia doesn't do is it doesn't reuse information, or not in the way that you might think it does. People do not write for remediation. That actually is self-evident, and they partly do it to control their content.
This is something
messing up with their stuff.
This is something that came up in the interviews this week, and that was both of the leaders I talked to. They were obviously older, and they felt that kids nowadays don't read enough, you know, read deeply enough, and it's all very brief things. And I think what we're seeing in this transition is an incredibly interesting thing of, you know, give me the heading in a really, really brief, quick, glanceable way. But yes, they're right. We need access to the deeper what's behind it as well. And, you know, right now we're rushing headlong into the tiny bits, but we're forgetting the deep bit, read the whole document bit.
Well, it goes a lot deeper. If you read Marianne Wolf and other people that study this problem, the digital age has actually unskilled the ability to do deep reading, because reading is only 5,000 years old. It's a function of brain plasticity. So the kids never develop the circuits to do the deep reading. So you have a real dilemma here. We've unleashed a technology that is changing our brains, or young people in particular.
But David, what I'm saying is that I don't think that's a bad thing in and of itself. I think to try to combine the two is useful, because like what you're doing yourself is jumping around a lot with your system, which is fantastic. It gives you breadth. that generations previously never had access to. But at the same time, much reading is rubbish. You know, when you read a newspaper story, the first paragraph is always, John went down the road to get in his new Honda car, you know, the little human bits. And then the second paragraph, because it was the end of the world, you know, that was the big thing. We need to get rid of, there's a lot of fluff, because there's expectation that a book has to be heavy, a journal article has to be big. But absolutely not. We shouldn't just be stuck on TikTok and Twitter. I just think we're just at an amazing point in time where we can really examine the opportunities of tiny pieces and big pieces and how they interrelate.
I mean, to relink my point about, you know, writing or creating with remediation in mind is, and sort of link it back to what's been shown. So Alan showed us that interesting sort of metro map type thing. And so part of what I'm thinking is, you know, if anyone here has ever tried to write stretch text, it's a really cool concept, but it's kind of hard to do. You know, language doesn't work quite that way. So when I take those bits that's in that metro map and then try and actually read and understand them beyond their headline level, do I have enough to make them run together? Because if literally they are just paragraphs of text, they may not immediately form a coherent narrative with a very small n, in the way that the tool is trying to tell us. So we now have the annoying fact is told there's something really interesting here. There's a path here, but we can't see it by looking at what's in it. So this is the thing about, so if you know you're writing information that has a value beyond just the main narrative, it's so how and to what level do you effectively give it extra metadata? I mean, it's partly informed, I suppose 14 years now I've been writing Tinderbox's sort of external manual, and it's thousands of notes, all heavily interlinked. And the path, because it's a toolbox, the path through that hypertext very much relates to what you're doing. And because by accident of birth, it was written in static hypertext, so I can't just, you know, it's easy for this database because I can fit all the paths. Here you have to think really, really carefully about where the links go and the entry points and the vernacular and shifts in. And the interesting learning point out of that is the things that have sort of slightly gone wrong, but just how careful you have to think about this, and actually how you probably don't think about it if you fall into the solecism that, oh, well, the computer will magically guess, because it won't. Given a chance, it will probably guess badly, unless it has a big enough and clean enough data set to sit atop.
You say this quite often, Mark, and it feels like you're banging on a stuck record, but I think it's a very important stuck record, because I think you don't have much of a solution, and neither do we. But to just highlight that, you know, we're not just writing a document to be read in a way. It is a new way of writing. We don't know what's going to happen to it. It's really worthwhile to keep putting that in the back of our heads. And I can see Alan's about to say something.
Oh, no, well, Vint, you were on mute. I think you said something.
Oh, yeah, Vint.
Oh, no, okay. Yeah, that is, I was just confirming that is a real problem, and I think that the graphical representation of analogies is really fruitful, but the current way that we're doing graphs is very faddish and kind of awful, and it lacks comprehensibility entirely. In fact, it actually, even an improvement would be something along the lines of another artist, Mark Lombardi, who would do maps of conspiracies, oil Bush era conspiracies in this fashion. I may have this upside down, but even that is more comprehensible. And if we can get past the hang up of the visual representation of how these things connect, it might actually become a more enjoyable way to read.
There are ways that have already gone beyond that, Alan. I'd be happy to show you some.
Love to see them. Yes.
And one of the things that I have notes to that I'd like to contact several people on this conversation, but I don't have their emails. How do I do that? Can I do that through you, Frode?
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy. Everybody here don't mind sharing with everyone else in the group, right?
Thank you.
It's an interesting point, actually, just as you're telling just now, is, and I find myself reflecting on it. I'm beginning to see it bubbling up, actually, in the sort of, the edge of the data data science tech sort of writing that I sort of track online, is that, pennies beginning to drop, that the visualization, be it static or dynamic, that you make is not the end point if you're interested in investigation.
No.
And that's a really fundamental error, because if it's the person who's implementing the system, if you think that the end point is you've made a sort of visually interesting picture, that you've missed the whole point. That's the starting point, because what that interesting picture is then allowing us, and indeed machine analogs, to see new links and new structures in it. So that's, again, another interesting area to watch. I mean, I think part of the problem at the moment is that creating the pictures is so damned hard for 99% of the population, that until we get to the point where people have actually built visualization tools that the ordinary man or woman, who's an office worker, skilled person, can actually use without going on a full week course to do it.
Yeah,
we
there's
won't progress.
definitely, Mark, a need for that. But of course, in order to do that, we need to have the metadata. Otherwise, there's nothing to visualize. And I know you're the biggest proponent of that. But I don't often mention Wendy Hall, my supposed supervisor. I think that's what she is. Absolute genius and very bizarre lady. This is recorded, I know. But she said to me many, many years ago at the beginning of my PhD, "Oh, I don't really have time to write anymore. What I want is a system where I can just put things in and it becomes a document." Mm-hmm. And I think she was very serious. And I think that's really something that I think about every once in a while, because if you're able to write in the way that you're talking about, Mark, then people should be able to not just do a citation of a thing, but literally, put things in a document, make a coherent narrative of what you need, put it in the world, and all that context is available for people. And if they want to put it into a rich visual environment, they can do that. But you can't do that with dumb text. And that's why it's so nice to have a look at that visualization you and Adam worked on, and to go in so many different directions, because you can't build data stuff without the data. And if the data is not connected, it's literally sand. It'll just fall to pieces. I emailed Vint earlier today, one of my little screeds of, oh my God, we need to do this. Otherwise, things are going to be a complete mess. I think the rest of you get it from me on a much more regular basis. Yes, we need visualizations, but we need to be able to have stuff to visualize.
Well, I've been doing that with the taxonomy that I found in information mapping for certain kinds of text. That is for stable, what I've been calling stable subject matters. But there are other whole areas like the ones that were mentioned on narrative, which I have not worked on at all, and except in the diagrammatic sense. Diagrams, in a certain sense, are a sort of narrative, which needs to be explored, and I'd love to explore it with several of the people here.
Well, I'd go back to Mark's point about human in the loop. There is a pretty well-established research base in learning sciences relevant to concept mapping. And what it shows is a concept map is an individual's, for the moment, understanding of key concepts within a domain and how they're interrelated. And it turns out, if I give my concept map to you and you don't know that domain, it's not very useful. And I think a lot of the visualizations are put out there, well, here you go. Well, if you're not prepared to make sense of that because you don't have a background, it's not very helpful. And you see so many examples. Well, here's this map. You can figure out what's going on. No, I can't. I haven't got the background to understand the visualization.
I think, David, you really...
For infographics. I started loving infographics, but now they make me frustrated most of the time because of the background needed to come to understanding with the infographic.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm going to have to show you, because I don't think you have seen this. This is the briefest thing, because about half of you know about this. So I'm an author and I'm writing about things, and this bit I'm going to write about me. So I write Frode Hegland, it's like, now I need to map this out. So I write here and I move my name up here. I'm only going to do 2 nodes. I'm not going to take a long time. I do Command D for define. And I'll write lots of things about me, but including that's really an important part of who I am, as most people know. And that's just one strand of me having defined while writing. This is really important. Second thing I add is Hamilton. And nothing happens. But if I now click on my name, there's a line to Hamilton. The reason for that is I wrote that sentence that includes Hamilton. I'll make that a little more clear by doing the layout like this.
This is sort of knowledge graphing.
It's sort of knowledge graphing, sort of concept mapping. I'm just calling it a map here because the thing is, the whole point just now about if you share a concept map with someone, they're not going to know what it is so important. So that's why this thing is geared towards one thing, helping students learn, and to learn by doing the relationship. So therefore, the I can write whatever. I write, it may be messy, it may be not. I can also add references at the bottom if it's a kind of an external concept, but it will show, it doesn't have any lines when you're not adding to it, when you're not interacting with it. So it's not messy. But I can say, okay, Hamilton's actually not that important in terms of something, I'll put it up there, but the line is there when I click on it. So the lines are always going outwards. So this is a way you can have a lot of concepts on a screen without getting overloaded. And because of these lines, you can then, hang on, that wasn't very well said, or that is wrong. Or why is there something missing here? It helps you kind of explore that space. And finally, when this is now exported, I'm just going to put a heading. So this is the simplest document you can imagine. I export this as, I'm just going to call it Untitled H for no reason. Open that in Reader. It has the contents and all kinds of stuff we don't really need. But up here, sorry, you covering me. If I select the text that happened to have a glossary entry and do Command F, the definition is on top. Mm-hmm. So that's the entry point when reading. If Hamilton had a definition in here that had anything in it, then you could click on that and you could basically jump around following that in a glossary form. So the reason I took these minutes to show the state of this, which is all powered by Visual Meta on export, is mapping is one thing, explaining is something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
good.
I love the thing about the lines, because I remember the conversation Fred and I had, and it's something I'm having another number of other spaces at the moment, is getting people to understand that, creating a line between two things automatically puts all the things with no line in the shade, and that wasn't actually one's intent. And nor does drawing a line between two things necessarily tell you either the intent of the link, or the weight of it. Going back, so I can't remember, I think it was might have been Bob mentioned, we mentioned weighing things, or the fact that this note links to that note 3 times doesn't mean it has 3 times the relevance. And we forget these things all too easily because we get so seduced by the graphical presentation that our normal analytical skills tend to fade into the background.
The AI programs and the NLP programs do claim to give salience of concepts, right? So this has a strong relationship, this is weaker, this is positive, this is negative. So how accurate that is, it depends, but that's the direction of machines to give you that information.
Yeah, which is useful. And what the notion of what the Adam Mark visualization timelines that I find is so exciting is that darn tab key, because you should be able to have that view, David, but then you should also only have the view of how you defined it. And then you should be able to switch into a completely different view.
And the other thing we've discussed, which hasn't so come to fruition yet, is the ability to, having used the views like Frode's just described, and finding a subset, a group, Sam's here, hi, and finding a subset within that is of interest, being able to maybe extract that in essence onto a fresh space. Because now you definitely, at this point, you definitely know that you want to hide those things, or you want to push them way out to the edge of the radar screen, where they're not, they're not pushing in on your visual comprehension.
I think Adam has forgotten to check his emails this week, that we had a monthly meeting an hour ahead of our normal meeting. And the same with Brendan. I think Brendan also thought it was only the normal, but we had the monthly meeting before, which is not, we're now going into the weekly meeting time. But just as a recap, we've had a wonderful chat about lots of different representations. And one of the things I've mentioned many times is Adam's innovation of the tab key in the visualization, to go same selected thing and showing it in different ways. It's just very, very fascinating. So Alan, you've both hidden your video and you got your hand up, so I'm not sure which signal you're sending here. He may be busy.
Obviously hit all the buttons at once.
Yes. So I'm not sure if we, maybe it is useful to do a little bit of a recap for ourselves as much as for the new guys who just entered the room. David was talking about how in Highlighter he has torn apart the Future of Text Book 1 and gone through ways of mapping it in new ways. Bob has been talking about importance of visualizing those mappings. And then we've talked about how, Vint, the very first time I met you, you introduced the term bound to me. You said you and me are now bound by this location because we have both been there. So there are strong connections, soft connections, associations, and all this stuff, and how we'll try to deal with that. Wow, everyone's so quiet all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say something to break the quiet. The last thing that the last topic that was being discussed was the lines that connect between words in graphs, and I just wanted to say that often those in diagramming are arrows, and back when I was a little more compulsive than I am today, I collected something like over 100 different kinds of arrows or different meanings of arrows. So we've got a bit of work to do in that direction, in saying what all that could be.
Do you mean visual representations of arrows, or do you mean something like link types?
I wasn't making it back at that time. I wasn't making that distinction. I was just saying visually this seems to mean that, but it also had to do with loops and all kinds of things which arrows did in diagrams, right, which had meanings for people, and sometimes didn't have meanings for people unless they were labeled.
That's really cool.
And then you even have the sensorial ink now, where the ink responds to the environment and points or gives information, different. This was mentioned in some of the essays. So the analogy is the color of hydrangeas tells you something about the soil, right? And it changes color in response to the soil. Well, now they're producing different inks that do the same kind of thing, that respond to the environment.
Oh, I haven't heard of that. And I have artists who really want to know about that.
Yeah, it's actually a whole industry that's expanding right now in different directions. So I love you have to read The Future of Text. It's in there in one essay.
Sensorial link, huh?
I have a picture of a pencil that senses your thought. The trouble is, when you're writing that polite letter to the council, it all comes out in a violent screaming red, which betrays your inner feeling.
That's exactly one of the essayists wrote about that. That wouldn't it be nice if the text expressed your emotion? I'm not so sure that would be nice, but because it could read. You have AI reading your facial expressions. So while you're writing, if you're looking tense, the text would reflect that tension. If you're looking happy, it would reflect that. That's what they're talking about, trying to give text some of the same qualities that face-to-face interaction has, seeing so much of communication is going to text instead of face-to-face.
And that's where, as the editor of the book, I have to step in and say, that would be amazing for some kinds of writing, but obviously not for all kinds of writing.
Yes.
Because one thing, when I talked to actually former president of Bosnia, I might as well mention it, wonderful, wonderful guy, this morning, he was talking about, you know, when you want to persuade people to talk to the public, you do it via video. But if you want to have it thoughtful and you really want to go deep, you do it via writing because it is clear in a different way. So I could imagine someone working really hard on getting their deepest soul onto the page. They may feel anguish, they may feel happy, but those emotions would wildly contrast with what they were trying to get across. So that's the whole point of the future of text as a community and a book. Let's go in so many different directions. You know, if they completely disagree with each other, the better. Alan, I see you're back, but Peter hasn't spoken yet. So Peter, please.
I find it very unnerving to think of an AI reading my facial expressions while I'm writing a document. What happens if you just get a notification come in that you're receiving a tax audit? It has absolutely nothing to do with what you're writing. The expression on your face is going to be misread, and it's going to associate and bind the emotion you got from the notification that just came in that no one can actually see from your screen, that's just horrified you with what you're talking about, and it could lead to all sorts of false linkages in people's minds. So that just seems like a bad idea, unless you like actively are entering a quasi mode to tell it, oh, okay, I want you to reading my expressions at the moment, and take the text, just to make it more convenient, so I don't have to manually do it. But that sort of thing should be definitely opt-in only.
Okay, I agree, Peter.
And a dark crimson overlay comes over Peter's text.
Alan, you still have your hand up.
Yeah, well, but the hand went up for just a topic for later. When you showed us the concept mapping that you have, I realized, you know, it's MVP and it's building out iteratively. At another time, I'd love to chat about some of the particulars of the interface there. I'll give you an example. The modal window for typing in your context. I would like that to have some ideas around those kinds of things and how it could be. I realize you want to keep things simple, but in the kind of the mentality of the user, a modal popping up that is an empty space is a friction point, I would think. I think there are other ways to handle that could be that could get your end result and still feel like it's in the same space without feeling like it's overcrowding, but something for another time. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I would love to explore that, but you know, my hands start sweating whenever there is a change or a feature because it's expensive, and so far actually commercializing this is become an issue. So yes, any suggestions welcome, but please accompany them with 5 new users.
Well, and then this is where this is the hellscape of making products, right? Is when do you make the bet between an interface change that is an affordance that actually completely redefines what this product is in the user's mind?
Yep.
Right. You could have even Notion, all these products, especially knowledge management tools, have a bloody history of features that they've released that were never adopted, and so they wound up killing them. But they were brilliant ideas, and if they had just been presented slightly differently, the conversations we're having like today around Rome and Obsidian and all this stuff, we would have been having in 2016.
Oh, Alan, I think you're completely right. And as a few people have pointed out, many modern intelligent university students don't understand a hierarchical file structure on their computer. And you know, it's easy to laugh at that, but at the same time, why should they? You know, you sit on a physical desk, you're not going to organize things like this. So when it comes to these kinds of interactions, I think you're dead on that they need to develop they need to feel as amazing as possible. It's important.
That brings up, and I'll just add to it, kind of what the conversation is going to afterwards. 2 incredible resources to check out. One is A City Is Not a Computer.
Don't we have a rule about no new books in this? Now I have to buy that one too.
I didn't hear that rule. And so what makes it great is that it introduces a great new vocabulary for talking about a lot of the things that we talk about. In particular, the hierarchical tree-like thinking that comes that we just, you know, as humans seem to prefer, we're comfortable with, and how that creates problems in cities. But even terms like dashboards, you know, she explains the definition or the origin of dashboard was on horse-drawn carriages, and it was to prevent the mud from splashing from the horse's feet to the person, right? And so what do dashboards do today? They keep the mud out. They keep the information that is messy away from us. And that creates a whole new series of problems. And then the last one is an article, I believe I'll find it. I think it was in the Atlantic, about how students, grad students don't understand the concept of files and folders.
Yep, that's the one.
That was, yeah. And it's wild. And I love it because they're right. The file and folder structure that we're so used to in computer programming is awful appendage. It's an awful workaround for something that we had no other way of doing things back then. But now they've got search.
I mean, you're pointing actually to a deeper problem, because there's a lot of research that shows that even faculty at universities are very poor at assessing the provenance and quality of information on the internet, right? So they do these research with different articles, and people will buy the right wing or extreme message article because it looks a certain way, and they don't dig deep enough to expose it, which is that you're actually touching on the whole thing of what is digital literacy, right? In the 21st century, what's this skill set people talking about in the future of future of text, that we need to focus on craftsmanship around text. What are the skill sets that are required? One quick anecdote from the future of text. I forget who wrote this, but they said that the dimensions of the Challenger, the rockets that we send up into space, was defined by how the Romans set the dimensions of highways. That our highways go back to Roman times, and as a result of how the lanes, those dimensions, the dimensions of the Challenger and so forth, had to fit within that. So this idea of the past, sort of lingering into the present and future is interesting.
So a bit of revenge on Alan, and actually what you said, Dave. There's this book that Alan highlighted a few weeks ago. It is, at least the beginning bit is really, really fantastic as an introduction to the history of text, but much better than basically anything I've read, because it comes at it from a political and democratic perspective. Who had the power with what kind of literacy when. And also this book is absolutely fantastic. It is, it talks about how cellular life is at the scale of where water moves at tremendous speeds. So a cell is not a quiet little organism like you would see in a school wall. It is a violent information system, and how it has to live with the external and internal, and how that is what creates evolution. And that is something that I'm using for visual meta, because our documents today are not cells. They don't live in an environment, so you can't have an evolution. My professor, Les, who's my advisor now, he pointed out that the problem with documents is the people who make the production, like word processing software, and the ones who do the publishing software, and the ones who do the reading software, have very different needs and agendas and priorities. We don't have anything to go through it. And of course, that's what we've been working with here as a team forever. But the analogy of the human and all life cells, of having this windowed environment, as they call it, is just phenomenal. Peter.
Okay, I put 2 truffles in the sidebar. A city is not a toy, talking about SimCity games and their relation to actual urban planning. And a city is not a tree, which was an essay by Christopher Alexander critiquing garden city plans that just have a perfectly symmetrical decomposition of a city into a series of overlapping spheres of increasing radius. On a different note, I've also been struggling a bit with how to export linked data in Tinderbox to get into a JSON format externally, because I want to capture the internal links, the external web links, and the link type information, I'd like to try to do that in a more automated fashion than the current export tags are directly lending themselves to. So I've been spending a lot of time trying to wrap my head around that one.
You
But then
might
once
give me
the data-
give me an email, Peter.
Okay, will do. Because once I have all that data out, then I can start playing with visualizations of it. But first, I want to make sure that I can be using Tinderbox as my GUI for building the richly linked structures, and then I can start playing with visualizing them once I have the data out in a really clean machine readable format. So that's where I've been this week.
Interesting, thank you. Okay, Alan, you owe me £12.53. Just put that back.
So I'm gonna just throw something out, and Frode, you can tell me to go away from that topic. You raised the point a while back about, there's a wide range of interests around the future of text, and like my interest is primarily multi-document, social reading and multi-document sense making, but there are 1,000 other things. I would like to, there was one of the artists that contributed to the future of text, and all he wrote was, there will be no future of text because there's not going to be a future. And somebody else quoted Leonard Cohen, and I've seen the future and it's murder. And from my standpoint, the primary focus for the future of text should be on how do we support research teams and other stakeholders involved in sustainability research, in public health kinds of issues, in smart city issues and so forth, so that we actually have a future of text. And so some of the conversation that moves towards marketing and customers and sales seems, for me, very much off topic, because there really is an elephant in the room, and that elephant is the going back to the Neolithic period. We're now on course to the sixth extinction, and we're well on our way. I just throw that out. Nobody wants to how that should impact on the purpose of this group is something, it's sort of like it should be everywhere.
Yeah, I'd like to grab onto that elephant with both hands and say that, I live in the United Kingdom. We still have a National Health Service. And the way that I explain when people want to chip away at that, and I'm sure everybody here agrees, is why would I want Edgar, my beautiful son, to be the only healthy kid around? It doesn't benefit him if there's someone down the road who is suffering mentally or physically or whatever. It will make, so even from the most selfish perspective, to not have a nationalized health service is insane. And I think that what we're talking about here with information tools is exactly the same. Yes, we should augment those people you're talking about doing that work, but I think it is really important to do the marketing and to do the sales, so to speak, to make sure that we can augment every single person who comes in contact with any kind of digital information. Because I firmly believe that the more freedom of movement we have to view and navigate through our information, the less likely we are to become a conspiracy nut, to put it bluntly. So that's why I think, that's why I'm doing my tool Author, and that's why I'm trying to sell it. I'm never going to make a profit out of it, that's fine. But if I don't sell it, then we are really kind of in-grouping this discussion. Even though I love California, I love sitting at Kepler's bookstore in Stanford, I love these dialogues. Sometimes they can get a little bit too much, oh God, let's use the word kumbaya, you know what I mean? And this is not against you, David. I think you and me are on the same page. But I'm saying that in so many different ways, we need to raise the alarm. And that is 100% what you're saying, but also just weird art stuff. Text can be different. So that's why with the Future of Text book, I don't edit anybody's contributions. It's none of my business. I don't know how to do that. I try to just curate the most interesting perspectives to come in. So let's do everything.
That's good. I like that.
David, I just want to connect with you in that way also. I'm actually a coordinator of a new committee for a major organization, which is called the Existential Risks to Humanity. And we can use some support of the kind that you're talking about. So I'll be back to you on that too.
Yeah, I just mentioned I'm working with this guy, Michael O'Rourke, who does workshops at NIH for large teams engaged in sort of global networking around big problems in sustainability and public health. And so that seems to me to be what you're into. I mean, that seems to me really an essential place to use technology to improve our ability to make sense of the world and come up with solutions to wicked problems.
Yes.
I spoke with Bruce Horn the other day. He worked with Steve Jobs on making the first Macintosh. He wrote the first Finder, and he became my first friend in this community. So I owe him a lot. And he feels very, very strongly that at this point, universities, all research funding, 50% of it must be for environmental survival. I think he's dead right. But we have to remember that those people in the general population, if they don't have access to interact with this knowledge, all kinds of nonsense will be said. I mean, for crying out loud, it's been difficult giving people free vaccines. What kind of a species are we, right? And, you know, we all do stupid things. I'm sure all of you, I know I do. But, you know, the more we can, anyway, I'm repeating myself. Mark?
Yeah, I just sort of living back to something that listening to people talk about, you know, I saw smiles who were saying, well, you know, people today don't understand filing systems. But I think there's a deeper thing that we more easily gloss over, because okay, that's fine. We can say, yeah, these are old systems. You know, other things will replace them, and why should they not? What I find more troublesome, and this was really brought home when I was sort of interning up in a government ministry a few years back, is that we're acting on conceptual structures that are predicated on these very systems that we now say don't matter, and it doesn't matter that people understand. So there's, you know, we are just kicking another leg out from underneath the table. But it's absolutely, you know, it's absolutely fine that these things change. The more interesting and the aspect of it we need to address is the fact that we need to remember that we also move our thought processes forward, so they're not dependent upon a system that is maybe no longer relevant.
But this is, Mark, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because over the last few weeks, I've been trying to persuade Ted Nelson to do an interview. And Ted is a close friend. He's stayed with me many times. I think he's crazy and a genius. I've said that to his face many times. But the thing is, he has a deeper understanding, I think, of anyone I've ever met about how tiny bits of knowledge can connect. You know, he puts Post-its everywhere. So I'm desperately wanting to interview him. But he keeps saying, watch my old videos. I've already said it. And he hasn't said it. He's talking about Xanadu and all that stuff. That's good and worthwhile. But when it comes to how we deal with units of knowledge, the stuff we talk about in these groups, even the people who were around before today and who have deep insights have real hard time understanding that they have the insights. Vint, you certainly know how to deal with making information small and moving it around. I want to hear what you have to say about this. Because you weren't spoon-fed on a Macintosh, were you?
So, yeah, well, I'm sitting here trying to get inside of Tim Berners-Lee's head, and it gives me a headache.
I can see that.
So, you know, the answer is, I don't know to what extent he would recognize what you just said. You mentioned, you know, that he leaves these little Post-its. Oh, I didn't know that, by the way. So that's news to me. I think the key thing that is driving Tim is the.
Well, hang on. Are we talking about Ted Nelson or Tim Berners-Lee?
Oh, I'm sorry. I misunderstood.
Okay. Just for context.
But crazy and brilliant at the same time also captures Tim.
Yes, absolutely.
That's what confused me. I don't actually know Tyndall, so I can't be a useful commentator.
No, that's fine. But I mean, also, I've had the pleasure of having a couple of really good conversations with Tim Berners-Lee, and he is half insane and half genius. The web is just a tiny bit of his brain. So I can see how you see the parallel there. But the reason I'm asking you, Vint, is because you've been involved in this for so long. And of course, packet switching was something you employed that was developed in different ways and so on. But the way you saw networks of networks, I mean, as we've discussed, the internet is not a network. It is an internet. There is so much in the thinking you have done that we live with every day. And
Don't get too carried away here. I mean, the architecture was forced on us, really, and a lot of the solutions were kind of forced on us by circumstances and boundary conditions. A little bit like partial differential equations that end up producing results based on what the boundary conditions are. So just to make the point, we knew after we demonstrated that the ARPA network and packet switching was useful for computer communication, and we could get different brands of computers to talk to each other by doing a whole bunch of agreements on common protocols. Then we said, how do we turn this into something useful for command and control? And immediately discovered we had to make it work for mobile radio and satellite. And in order to keep the architecture from becoming totally crazy, we segregated the networks by character, so to speak. Mobile radio, ground-based mobile radio, and satellite, distinct from the ARPANET. And as soon as those networks didn't know that they were part of the internet, and we didn't want them to know that, because they'd already had built up a capability of moving things around within the net. So each net thought it was the only net in the world. And the only way you could get them to be part of a bigger system was to stick a box in between, and we call them gateways. And they knew how to talk to each network. They also knew that they were part of the internet. And so we would put internet packets encapsulated in the packets of each of the individual networks. And when they hit a gateway ripped them out of that envelope and looked at it, said, where's this going? Recognizing that it's going to an internet destination that says, which network is it going to? And if it knows a path to get there, it encapsulates it in the next network envelope and sends it on its way either to the destination host or to the next gateway. I mean, all of this stuff just derives from a set of simple boundary conditions. So
yeah, if you're smart enough to actually look for those boundary conditions.
well,
And the reason I say that, no, Vint, I'm not just trying to give you a compliment. What I'm trying to say is my dear friend Doug, in the beginning did, later on didn't. Ted Nelson never did. Right? They're both geniuses and invented amazing worlds, but they didn't take into account the boundary conditions, and therefore it didn't happen.
well, but some of it did happen. I mean, look at what Doug did with NLS. I mean, he did build something and it was useful.
In the beginning, yes, absolutely.
But things don't get big unless there's a reason to invest in making them bigger. And we were lucky in the internet case that there was a business case to be made for a lot of different purposes, whether it's applications or the routing hardware or building networks and offering services. The whole thing had business stories associated with a lot of the different pieces. And that's what has allowed it to continue to grow and expand.
So
And
they, you know,
yeah, go ahead.
the corollary to that is what, again, raised in the future of text. A number of people ask, well, this hypertext stuff has been around for a long time. Why don't we see more adoption? We see so much experimentation and so many interesting things, but by and large, people don't use hypertext very much, or they like to read. And when it comes to reading, they like to read in a linear way. And why don't we see more adoption? And one of the solutions has been, this is where the AI comes in, and while you're reading, the machine can say, oh, here's something you might be interested in that's relevant, so that the reader doesn't have to break their flow, right? Because people like to just read the document and not go off and get distracted either looking for something related and so on. So there's a lot of issues about usability and adoption that have to do with how, you know, what people are used to and how we think and read. So I just wonder, yeah.
Okay, so I feel like I have to defend the linear case.
Right.
The guy that writes the linear case is saying to you, I've thought hard about all this.
Right.
You could get lost in the forest of concepts here. Let me help you not get lost.
Right.
If you as a kid, I had a set of encyclopedias, and I would sit down and start reading, and then I'd hit something I didn't know anything about, so then I'd go and look that up. And pretty soon I'd spent a couple of hours crawling around in the space, and then I'd forgotten where I started.
Right.
And although I had picked up a lot of knowledge, it wasn't very well organized. So I'm not arguing that linearity is the only way of organizing information. That would be silly. But it is a very easy way to be led through a series of concepts. And if the writer is good enough, then the sequence in which you experience those concepts can be extremely helpful because they could build on each other.
And my point was that what people are saying is that the user design for hypertext documents is in such a primitive state that it just doesn't, people don't connect with it very well. We haven't figured out, and maybe things like Frode's work are sort of heading in that direction, something
Well,
that's.
So let me suggest that Frode has worked very hard on several aspects here. One of them is production, which gets very exciting because of the different ways in which you can visualize and view and interact with the growing document. And these are fascinating tools that don't exist elsewhere. But imagine for just a moment that in addition to the structural mechanism that Frode has put into the reader, that we also provide an aid to the consumer of the content to remember stuff that they should do later. So, as you read something, it happens to me all the time. I'll be reading something and then I have to go look something up in Google. And I want to make sure I can get back to where I was. And I can imagine building some tools to help people remind themselves that they thought of something that they don't necessarily have to resolve at that moment, but they don't want to forget to resolve it because it was relevant at a moment and they want to retain that. So I'm thinking that maybe the reader tool needs to have parts to it that I may not know about, or maybe that don't exist, that allow a reader to consume the document and still be able to capture things that they want to know more about.
So that's actually a highlighter, in that you can highlight something, move it to the right margin, maintain a link from back to where it came from, and write a comment, come back to this later, click right back in the document, and preserve that as something that's in a library. You can pull it out at any time, as well as combine it. Yeah.
There's a temporal, well, it's not necessarily temporal activity, a contextual aspect that's important here too.
Yeah.
Because what a lot of our PKM stuff is doing again and again is building another bucket to put stuff in. And you can get, and then when that bucket's full, well, you just use a different tool because somehow this bucket will be better at collecting. Like what doesn't happen is this, oh right, so this piece of paper that had 2 days ago, it relates to this thought, this track that I was following at the time, and that might be its only importance. What tends to happen is the tools say, this is an object, it must relate to everything else in the entire sort of bucket. No, it doesn't. It might do, but until you've looked at that original captured in the moment connection, you don't know. And that's one of the fundamental weaknesses of these tools at the moment. The presumption is that if I collect enough stuff, insight will follow. And that's not what we're trying to do when we note take. We're trying to just remember what the heck we were doing at the time we wrote the thing down.
Absolutely. Just to go a little bit back before coming into this, Vint, the whole thing about a linear document. First of all, writing a linear document is very, very hard. I'm trying to write my PhD thesis now, and it's easy to go bzz, right, and then you have to connect the pieces. I find it excruciating. I have to go. I'm on focus on some of the days. Right?
Figuring out the order
Yeah.
in which to use things is incredibly hard. I find that the most difficult thing in the world, because I've got this concept and there are all these pieces and I want everybody to know everything before I say anything.
Yeah.
And it's really hard.
Well, I have to say
there is a way to do that I've been using for myself and for others, which is a roughly 12-foot long, 5-foot high, what I call an information mural. Other people call other things.
Yeah.
And you can put all kinds of other structures within that. That is, I have one. I can't show you right now because I'm upstairs in my my studio is downstairs, but some other time I'm happy to show anybody what it is. But you may have a linear historical view, but within the timeline, you may have an organization about the problems today, and in another case, you may have how it connects to all the stakeholders. I'll just give you 3 possible organizations that actually occur on one of the murals I can show you. So it's partially that we're trapped in the space of a page.
Oh, absolutely. Brandon, I see a big yellow hand.
Hey, that's me. Potentially silly question, but then tying in with, because it takes so much skill to create a sound linear document that provides an argument, that it requires a level of expertise in the subject area as well as the skill of the writer. Doug talked a lot about methodology and tools. Is it kind of our duty to enable nonlinear writing so that it can raise the level, essentially affording more people to create really great work? And so this is kind of a philosophical thought, but is that what the aim should be of tools of today?
Maybe, although there was something really compelling about what Doug did with NLS, and that was to force a certain discipline on you, which I wish we could continue to enforce, but our writing tools have not done so. So he would force you into having hierarchical structure, and he also forced you to get concepts into the system at the highest level. The first sentence of the paragraph should embody, what's to follow. The titles should make sense. And you could view the document in order to test the theory that you had followed that discipline. And I found it made for really much better writing on the presumption that the document was going to be consumed linearly. On the other hand, there's nothing that stops you from hopping around in the document. That's what hyperlinks were for, among other things. So I don't know if you've ever used tutor texts, but way back in the 60s, this was an attempt to do what we do with computers today in a fixed textbook. And so you'd be reading the textbook and you'd get to a question and you would answer the question, and depending on which answer you took, if you were wrong, it would take you off to page 672 and you do a remedial thing, and then you would go back again. And they did that. I mean, I remember, and it was a little weird, but it was a kind of interesting because it was an adventure. And the fact that you weren't doing it linearly meant it was different, and that made it interesting.
Yeah. Vint, I have to show you this because of what you just said about the outline. So I've been testing it because we don't have Doug's training of writing like that. So I am very frustrated going through my own document to find out what's there. I did experiment with the first line that Doug had, and often it just doesn't work. So instead, I have this thing called Command-Shift-B, which hides everything that isn't a heading or bold.
Yeah.
So I now write with a lot of bolding for myself.
Yeah.
This is the key thing. And it really helps me skim through my own document to get a clue what's there. When I export it, of course, that goes away. It's not for other people. So thanks for highlighting that. That was good to be reminded of how NLS had that beautiful structuring.
You mean you don't let other people do that for your writing?
Oh, anybody can do it in author, but not when you're reading.
Well, that's too bad, actually, because the fact that I actually loved the idea, and I thought, oh, that's a fantastic way of getting an idea of what's in the document. Why the hell did you take it away from me, you dumbass?
Okay.
It's like an inverted highlighting.
Now wait a minute, Vint. He's doing the same thing that all the English teachers do. They teach us to write outlines, and when we've got a very clear outline, then write the paper, but don't let the reader see the outline with bold or some other way.
Oh, this is fantastic to hear these discussions, because this is the whole Vint and David point earlier about Are you writing small or are you writing big? And how are you writing it? So Peter and Mark, we're going to have to put visual meta affordances in so that a PDF can actually bold on demand by the reader if that is done by the author.
I would love that. That is very cool.
So I just have to jump in here because you're talking about something I've been working on for the last 10 years. Vince, you're describing what I consider the quintessential problem of the information age, which is how does an individual or group make sense of information that's distributed across many different sources to connect that information to what you already know or the collective intelligence of the team to produce something new. Now, from an instructional systems point of view, when you create an outline, you generally end up summarizing what other people, that's a good way to say what other people have already said. And so it doesn't, we expect people to be creative, but we don't give them tools that promote creativity. So I'll just give you just very quickly, I took these 550 excerpts that I thought were interesting from 170 essays in the future of text, put them into the right margin, which I call a highboard, hypertext clipboard. Each snippet has a link back to where it came from within the essay, and it also shows my comments, excerpts from other documents that I might have added, and links to other documents, right? I go through and tag those excerpts. I ended up with about 20 tags, and I go sort by tag. Now I've got 20 buckets of related snippets. And then what I did in this case, because there was so many, printed them out, cut them up on sort of heavy stock, and organized them into what turned out to be 9 chapters or subtopics. And then all I had to do was put the numbers in, and Highlighter recreates that new order with headings, because I have a feature that lets me put headings in. And then I go within, I move the chapters around for global coherence. All right, this is the first chapter, which is people talking about the purpose of the essays itself. And the next one is the nature of text. And the next one is the history of text or whatever. And then with it, so that's global coherence, the breadth. And then I go within each subchapter or topic and arrange the snippets doing what I call coherence monitoring. Does this snippet follow from that? And if not, what's missing? What do I need to go out and put in? Or do I need to put a note in there that explains why I just shifted? Now, here's the part that I think gets lost so often. It goes back to Peter's human in the loop. The real magic to the system is I'm engaged in an activity that's preparing my mind for insight. This kind of excruciating process of what's the story I want to tell? How do these things flow one to the next? What's missing? What do I know? What don't I know? What pattern is emerging? All of this kind of second order meta thinking is preparing my mind, as Pascal, as Pasteur would say, for moments of insight and for serendipity. And that is a very different process than what most people do. Even like with Raphael's file cards, it's still back in the I'm going to make an outline of what everybody else said. This is about restructuring, going back to Bob's information blocks, restructuring those blocks, linking them to what I already know, turning on my associative memory and curiosity, go out and find things that aren't in the documents to then expand my story. And at a certain point, you have this phase change where you have now achieved what's called fluid intelligence and crystallized knowledge. I know enough about this topic now to actually have an insight. And crystallized knowledge, the knowledge is not inert, but it's tied to what I already know. I've got enough of it in my long-term memory that it becomes actionable. And now all of a sudden, if I read something and I find a snippet, I know exactly where it goes. Oh, this relates to that slot 27 where that topic was XYZ and so forth. And that's that. I'm sort of giving you a precursor to a preview of the demo I would do about, but at any rate, this, for what problem is this the solution, right? That's the needs assessment question. So often we're coming up with all these great things to do with knowledge graphs and AI and so forth, but they don't really solve the problem of how the human being can make sense of a large amount of information to create something new. And that's what I tried to design and build with Highlighter. And we're very close to having a release of this thing for you guys to try out at some point.
Yeah, thanks, David. I really look forward to a presentation where you can also record it. Mark.
Yeah, I really love that. And I saw David's work in the early stage, which sort of links me back to a conversation I had at the time. Something we also, a more challenging thing to make space for is the things that don't link to something. I mean, I've had enough years of people telling me I'm a bit different, and I'm now beginning to understand why. Because one of the things is I don't work off. I find it really hard to think in terms of underlining stuff. And to me, the thoughts live between the words. And this isn't, to me, this is not a zero-sum game. It's just, and I don't know why it is, but sometimes I can't actually find the thing that I take from the text, from within the text itself. So an absolutist method will be, well, I have to underline something, or there can be no structure. And I'm interested in finding just gentler ways, rather than brutalizing your thought in those terms, so it can live alongside all the cases where we can, definitively point to someone and say, yes, this is the genesis of the idea, or this is the point that I think is being made. Mm-hmm. Just a side thought.
That's interesting.
I just dropped another truffle in the sidebar. This one's a command line tool. It can distill a website into a PDF.
Huh. Oh, that's cool.
And it can also combine multiple URLs into a single PDF, and it'll automatically index them. So it'll give you a table of contents to jump you between multiple documents if you want to stitch them all together.
This is Percolate?
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, cool. Because that would allow us to bring the website directly into Highlighter because we're processing PDFs.
It would be helpful, maybe it exists and I just don't know about it, to have a tool that collects the chat, the things that people have put in the chat in a conversation like this, which I don't usually read or can't read and still pay attention to what people are saying in Zoom. So it would be very nice to have the chat, let's say, copied out and sent to us all.
But Bob,
yeah, so that exists.
Does it?
Yeah,
yes,
no, I mean, it does record it. The only problem is that I'm a bit stupid. I do get the video and the text separately. So what I can easily do, and I will do starting with this conversation, is in the comment of the YouTube video, I will put the text conversation.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so Bob, if you go on YouTube, you can open up the transcript of every YouTube.
No,
it's right there in the right column.
No, I don't think, David, that's what Bob means. He means the text chat that
chat log. Yeah.
No, I know, but I'm saying that the technology is now advanced to the point where it can very accurately
David,
produce a text of.
We're not talking about transcript.
Oh, you already have the chat, not the conversation, right? Got you.
Yeah. So it's the text chat.
The links. Okay, I was thinking of the voice chat. Yeah.
All the good stuff. We have started doing transcriptions on some of these, and the quality is absolutely awful because we tend to say a lot and we repeat words. So even if the quality of the transcription is perfect, human speech is awful. It's so shocking to have dealt with it. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion.
No one speaks in complete sentences as far as we can tell.
Which is why we need them to write. On that note, we have a few minutes left. Any other maybe different topics? Adam has been very quiet today, maybe because he's so gloomy and gray up there in Sweden. Anything for report or any questions, Adam?
Not really. I've been experimenting with text input this week, as touchscreens have taken over the world. Everywhere the buttons and keyboards are replaced by touchscreens. I've been thinking about how to make writing text on touchscreens quicker or more fluid. I don't think it makes sense to put a QWERTY keyboard on a touchscreen, because you have to look at your fingers anyway to find the. So we could potentially rearrange every letter anyway, because you have to look, and then you can do the opposite of QWERTY to put the words close together, or common. So you could. So I've been looking at. I've been experimenting how you write with the pencil, a digital pencil, and do quicker writing, just as an experiment. So that was from the trenches in Stockholm, the dark, gray and gloomy Stockholm.
Have you looked at air writing? That's developing, you know, where the computer picks up your gestures and puts the text up.
But most both Connect and what's the other one that was popular 10 years ago. The problem is that you get very tired in your hands after a while. So so I think having it will look a bit silly to wave the hands all the time out in public. So we need the small and discreet ways of taking notes. It would be silly for me to take my notes here with my hands and distract you. So,
Adam, can you do a brief show and tell of the visualization with the little green boxes? I think it would be very relevant to the group to have a quick look. While he's trying to find it, by way of introduction, it's a different way to go through the corpus of the hypertext documents, and he always spends about 10 minutes explaining all the issues with it. So don't do that, Adam, because there are no issues with it. It's a really provocative and cool new way of thinking about it. So it's along the lines of how we're in this group having a dialogue around it, except I have to say what Adam is about to show is entirely Adam.
So let's see if we can.
Alan has his hand up.
Oh, yeah. I think Peter first. Peter, if it's brief, please.
Yeah, I think one day it might pay to spend a little time revisiting Randy Trigg's link taxonomy and thinking about maybe whether we could come up with a shorter and more useful contemporary equivalent, and then put that into the visual meta.
That's an interesting point. Thank you, Peter. Alan?
Okay, and going down.
Yeah, I was just, this is a different topic, maybe for another time, but as something to ponder, iOS 15 or the latest update is so many miles away from where they were a few years ago, which is wonderful. The dark ages of Animoji. It seems like what they're doing now is they've actually understood their responsibility as a platform and a protocol, and the updates, the new features at a platform level are stunning. In particular, live text, which I think is something that will radically change how we interact. I think there will be startups that are built just entirely around this new feature. I can't imagine what they are, but yeah, so take a look at those updates, and I think they'll feed into, in some cases, it will enhance. I mean, it's augmented intelligence in some ways. Go ahead, Frode.
Yeah, well, we're waiting for Adam to find the right screen. What we've already implemented is, if you read a normal paper book, take a picture of it while you're sitting out on the veranda reading it. When you are in Photos on your Mac, select any text on that page. Doesn't have to be an interesting bit, because maybe you scribbled over that and it's not legible. Paste that into author as a citation. It'll find the damn book and cite it for you. Because we use Google Books, so it searches full text, not by title. So yes, Alan, those innovations are real use of real advanced stuff that are really beneficial, and it will be amazing. Thanks for highlighting that. Oh, here we go. Okay.
So let's see, is my mic on? So this was, we have been playing with the ACM hypertext documents. So these are about 1,000 documents from ACM hypertext that we laid. We have been playing with different ways of visualizing that corpus. So now every square here represents one of the papers, and if you click on a square, you get the abstract from it, and you can read the check the references and follow kind of a navigation path here where you check the references back in time. So it's a way of using more of the screen, because often the screens we don't use the full width of the screens. Text is usually, it becomes a long scroll or many pages on top of each other. But this is a way of using more of the width of the screen to actually visualize your navigation history. The regular web pages, they replace everything. When you click on a link, it takes away everything and it jumps to a new place. Ted Nelson calls that a jump link, but it's not even a jump. It's kind of a hyper jump, because everything is replaced. So in a regular jump in real life, you see where you came from, but not on web pages. You do hyper jumps, and everything is replaced. So this is a way of preserving the history of your navigation. And for some papers, if you happen to have them, let's see. You can, my prototype is still but imagine that you can that you will be able to read the papers inline here, and also to click on references in that paper and immediately jump to the next document and see it side by side. So it's Ted Nelsonian in that way, parallel documents, but also many parallel documents. You navigate and you jump to the next one and next one. So imagine that Wikipedia looked like this instead, where you actually saw where you came from, and you could go back to at least follow a linear path. Of course, browsing is very, you go back and you go down in a different branch, and it's more of a tree and a graph, but this is a way of doing at least a linear representation of it visually.
So Adam, this is kind of interesting. If you look at
go ahead. No, that was my secret touch keyboard that you now saw.
Oh, show us real quick, please.
No, it doesn't make sense to show it on a computer, but it should be shown on a touch screen.
So Chris North's group at Virginia Tech is doing this process of incremental formalism and semantic interaction. So they observe the activities of the analyst, or in this case, your reader, what documents are opening, what things they're searching for, turn everything into a parameter, and build an interest model such that when the user is got a document or a few documents open, the machine will say, here's other stuff relevant to what you're looking at. So what you have could be a kind of interesting way of preserving the history of somebody's travels across the internet, and then having the machine say, oh, I see your pattern here, so you don't have to break your synthesis, your reading. Here's some things that are closely related or distantly related. So it might be interesting to have an introduction. You should just check Chris North at VTU. He's very accessible, great guy. And also, incidentally, doing a lot, one of his areas is with large arrays. We was talking about the 12-foot screen. That's what he's done research on for many years. Chris North, great guy.
Thanks for that, David. And Peter, you in a second. I just wanted to say, Vint, part of these visualizations is based on an email I sent to the group where we've been thinking about your presentation on the 5th of November. I know it's only going to be a 5-minute video including everything, but because it's about supercomputing and the humanities, we've thought about what if you had 10 million documents on your screen in full? What are the different ways you could visualize and deal with that? So one of the early things we did is, what sort of monitor would you need? So in order for one pixel to be one document, you'd need a monitor about 24 inches using the Mac Retina display. If you have something like a 13-inch monitor, it's only 3-4 million. So Adam's pixels there on the left, they're one way of imagining that we could have every single pixel be one. And then we can start doing commands into the system, maybe turning the screen down to change parameters. So we would see islands and rivers, and there can be motion. So that's the thinking, and we hope we may have a couple of screens for you on that date to show that if the documents have inputs and output, in other words, visual meta, if they go into a world, what's the kind of richness we can have out of it?
Well, so now let me just, I realize we're over time here, but you have probably seen some other examples where people have shown multi-dimensional views of information clustering and things like that, where there's huge amounts of information, but you can zoom in on various clusters and begin to see more structural. That's also a rather exciting thing, and it's not new because the spatial database management system was something that was put together by Nick Negroponte when he was running the Media Lab in the 1970s. And you would sit in a chair with a little joystick and you would steer your way into information space displayed on a gigantic screen. And the closer you got to a filing cabinet or something, you would hear things about what was inside the filing cabinet. It was a rather interesting exploration of information discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give it over to Peter, Mark, and Alan, but it is that zooming thing is really important. When you're dealing with a few dozen documents, and that is in the background, and when you're dealing with one, to have those fit together in different modes. Peter?
Yeah, just once again, I'd commend to you Cyberspace for Steps, Michael Dick, editor, MIT Press. And also I wanted to ask Adam if he thought about allowing us to drill down on two paths simultaneously, but basically having your current visualization, but split horizontally with 50% of the screen on top, 50% on the bottom. So you could have two different paths drilling through the document, and then that would give us two items at once on screen, so we could add links between them.
Yes.
To answer that quickly, I've been considering that, but the screen state is very precious here. So I think if that's the case, I think the ideas of a fisheye view is better, where with the selected path is bigger, or one or two maybe, but the rest of them goes very small, as in a fisheye lens.
But Peter, we will keep hacking away on this with Adam on the weeklies. I hope briefly, Mark and Alan.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just a quick thing, really, on the visual meta side. Although I was ill at the beginning of this week and I haven't resolved some of the technical problems, I have taken my thesis and put that into visual meta. But the point was, the test cases, there are about 250 headings, there are over 1,000 references in 2 discrete bibliographies, copious appendices, and it has a glossary and everything. And I've got it all, apart from the fact that PDF and ligatures proved to be a problem. We pretty much got it as VM. And the point of doing that was to just take a large and existing document of record and actually seeing what it looked like and what are the practical problems in retrofitting VM beyond the self-reference point. And that was part of hopefully to give us some more underpinnings in data terms to the things that are coming up in November.
It's been so wonderful to see, Mark, and to find out this repeated issue of ligatures being a practical problem is completely insane, but it's a reality we have to deal with. Alan, final words go to you.
I'll go quick. Yes. So on the topic of a large corpus of text, this is something that if the lowest hanging fruit that I can think of flies in the face of what is conventional wisdom about how we browse. And so I'll present it to you and it'll be distasteful, but essentially we already have the holodeck, if you will. We already have the room that we can operate in, but we are trained ourselves to say, if I look at a site on my phone or on an iPad, I should be seeing the same thing. And I think the argument could be made of the value of the reverse. So let's take Adam's interface, and I'm looking at it on my screen here where I'm reading the text, but I know that on my iPad, I can go to the same site and see this kind of fisheye view. And as I'm updating something here, I'll see it update here, but I'm telling it's easy for my mind to say, hey, this is my large map scope over here on my iPad. Maybe I even have a view on my phone of the same site, but it's like I'm flagging things to remember or to send to my other tools, and then my readings here. So just exploring that space would be so fruitful. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Different media have different affordances, and we should exploit that, just like Adam was talking about the keyboard. So for those of you who are not able to join Mondays and Fridays, if you do have time to dip in, we do start an hour later than we did today. So that's why we kind of had these two sessions combined, which was super lovely. And if you do want to come in, it doesn't mean you have to come in forever. That's absolutely fine. And I thank you all for today. And on the 19th, we have our 10th anniversary Future of Tech Symposium. There will be a few presentations, but it will be mostly the first day randomized breakout rooms, just so we get a chance to talk to different people. And at the end of that day, there will be some sort of submission of proposed topics. And there will be two sessions the next day for those who can make that one that's a bit more Asia friendly, and another one. They will all be recorded. Those second day discussions will be by named group, most likely. And it's all just amazing to have this dialogue with you guys. So I thank you all insanely much. And have a good weekend, as much and as calm as possible. Bye for now.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye. Have a good weekend.
Thank you,
I'll see
Frode.
you guys.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.